In the year 2156, a team of scientists from the Chronotech Corporation had finally discovered the key to time travel. The team, led by renowned physicist Dr. Olivia Williams, had been working on the project for over a decade, and they had finally succeeded. Using a combination of quantum mechanics and advanced computer algorithms, the Chronotech team had developed a time machine that could transport people back to any point in Earth's history. However, the team knew that such a discovery was dangerous and that it could have dire consequences if it fell into the wrong hands. To ensure that the time machine would only be used for the betterment of humanity, the Chronotech team decided to test the machine themselves. They would travel back to the age of the dinosaurs, a time when the world was vastly different from the present day. The team, consisting of Dr. Williams, 2 other scientists, and a group of 5 volunteers, stepped into the time machine, and with a flash of light, they were transported back 65 million years. The team found themselves in a lush, tropical forest, surrounded by towering trees and the sounds of chirping insects. In the distance, they could see a herd of triceratops grazing on the foliage. The team was amazed, and they began to explore their surroundings. However, things quickly took a turn for the worse. The team had not accounted for the dangers of the prehistoric world, and soon they found themselves being hunted by a pack of velociraptors. The team was forced to run for their lives, trying to stay alive in a world where humans were not at the top of the food chain. Despite their scientific knowledge and advanced technology, the team was unprepared for the sheer brutality of the ancient world. They struggled to survive, battling the elements and the ferocious predators that roamed the land. Over time, their numbers dwindled, and they began to realize that they may never make it back home. As the team struggled to survive, they began to experience strange side effects from the time travel. Their bodies began to warp and change, adapting to the harsh conditions of the prehistoric world. They grew claws and sharp teeth, their senses becoming more acute. The team realized that they had become part of the ancient world, and they would never be able to return to their own time. In the end, the Chronotech team's experiment had backfired, and they had become the very thing they had set out to study. They had become part of the ancient world, and their fate was sealed. The team had learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of playing with time, but it was too late. They were trapped in a world of monsters and predators, and they would never return home. As the Chronotech team struggled to survive in the prehistoric world, they began to realize that something was not quite right. The side effects they were experiencing were not simply adaptations to the environment, they were mutating. The team's bodies were changing at an alarming rate, and they soon discovered that they were not the only ones. As they traveled further into the jungle, the team encountered other groups of travelers who had also been sent back in time. However, these groups were different. They were mutated beyond recognition. Some had grown wings, others had developed extra limbs, and still others had become grotesque, hybrid creatures with features of both humans and dinosaurs. The Chronotech team realized that their time machine was not working as intended. The machine was not simply sending people back in time, it was altering them on a genetic level. The team had unwittingly become part of a twisted experiment, one that was being conducted by an unknown force. As the team struggled to survive and unravel the mystery of their predicament, they discovered that they were being hunted by the very creatures they had become. The mutated travelers were no longer human, and they were driven by a primal instinct to hunt and kill. The Chronotech team realized that they were not the top of the food chain after all. In a desperate bid for survival, the team decided to destroy the time machine, hoping that it would undo the mutations and send them back to their own time. However, as they worked to dismantle the machine, they were attacked by the mutated travelers, and a fierce battle ensued. In the end, the Chronotech team emerged victorious, but at a cost. Dr. Williams, the team's leader, had been fatally wounded in the battle. As she lay dying, she whispered a warning to her surviving teammates. "The time machine was not our creation," she said weakly. "We were only the latest in a long line of experiments. The machine was designed to create new life forms, to test the boundaries of evolution. And now, we are part of that experiment." The surviving members of the team looked at each other in horror, realizing the truth of her words. They had unwittingly become part of a sinister scheme, one that had been going on for millions of years. As they huddled together, unsure of what to do next, they heard a low, rumbling growl. Looking up, they saw a massive, mutated T-Rex emerge from the jungle, its jaws dripping with saliva. The Chronotech team had escaped the prehistoric world, but they had not escaped the consequences of their actions. They were trapped in a never-ending cycle of experimentation, destined to be mutated and sent back in time again and again, forever hunted by the monsters they had become. The remaining members of the Chronotech team knew they had to act fast. They had to find a way to break the cycle and put an end to the experiments. They quickly gathered what they could salvage from the time machine and set out into the jungle. As they trekked through the dense foliage, they encountered more and more mutated creatures, each one more terrifying than the last. The team struggled to fight them off, and their numbers dwindled even further. After several days of wandering through the jungle, they stumbled upon a cave system that seemed to go on for miles. The team cautiously made their way inside, hoping to find a way out of this nightmare. As they descended deeper into the caves, they began to encounter strange, glowing crystals that seemed to pulse with energy. The crystals hummed with a strange, otherworldly power, and the team soon realized that they had stumbled upon the source of the time machine's abilities. They also discovered something else, the source of the experiments. A massive, ancient machine lay hidden deep in the heart of the cave system, humming with a strange, unearthly energy. The machine was not of this world, and it was clear that it had been designed to create new forms of life. The Chronotech team realized that they had to destroy the machine if they were ever to escape this never-ending cycle of experimentation. They gathered their remaining resources and set about sabotaging the machine. As they worked, they heard a roar from deep within the caves. They knew they were running out of time, the mutated creatures were closing in. With a final push, they managed to set off a massive explosion, destroying the machine and collapsing the caves. The Chronotech team emerged from the jungle battered and bruised, but alive. They had put an end to the experiments, but they knew that they could never fully escape the consequences of their actions. They had meddled with time, and they had paid the price. Years later, the surviving members of the Chronotech team would tell their story, warning others of the dangers of time travel. They would become cautionary tales, warning future generations of the perils of playing with the fabric of time itself. But for the team, it was too late. They were forever marked by their experience, destined to carry the weight of their actions for the rest of their lives. The surviving members of the Chronotech team struggled to readjust to their normal lives. The horrors they had experienced in the prehistoric world haunted them, and they were plagued by nightmares and flashbacks. They sought therapy and support from each other, but they knew that they could never truly escape the trauma. But then something strange began to happen. One by one, the surviving members of the team began to develop strange abilities. One could move objects with their mind, another could control fire, and yet another could shapeshift. They realized that the experiments had not been in vain, they had been imbued with extraordinary powers. The team struggled to understand their newfound abilities, but they soon realized that they had a responsibility to use them for good. They formed a group, calling themselves the Timekeepers, and set about using their powers to protect the world from harm. But as they fought to right wrongs and prevent disasters, they also found themselves drawn into a web of intrigue and conspiracy. They discovered that there were other time machines in existence, each one controlled by a different organization with their own agenda. The Timekeepers found themselves in a race against time to prevent these organizations from altering history to suit their own purposes. As the Timekeepers battled against these organizations, they also struggled to come to terms with their own powers. Some members of the team found their abilities difficult to control, and they worried about the consequences of their actions. They also knew that they could never fully escape the shadow of the experiments that had given them their powers. But despite the challenges they faced, the Timekeepers were determined to use their powers for good. They worked tirelessly to protect the world from threats both present and future, and their efforts did not go unnoticed. The Timekeepers became known as heroes, revered by many for their selfless actions. However, as the years passed, the team began to realize that their powers came with a price. The strain of using their abilities took a toll on their bodies and minds, and they began to age at an accelerated rate. They knew that they could not continue to fight forever, but they also knew that they could not simply retire and fade into obscurity. They had to find a way to pass on their legacy to a new generation. And so, the Timekeepers began to search for individuals who possessed the potential to inherit their powers. They scoured the world for those who had been touched by time, seeking out those who had been exposed to its mysteries in one way or another. They found soldiers who had fought in wars, scientists who had experimented with time dilation, and even a few survivors of the Chronotech experiments. One by one, the Timekeepers trained their successors, passing on their knowledge and their powers. They knew that their time was running out, but they also knew that they had succeeded in their mission. They had created a new generation of heroes who would carry on their legacy and protect the world from harm. As the last of the original Timekeepers passed away, the new generation took up the mantle, using their powers to continue the fight. And though they faced new challenges and new enemies, they knew that they would always be part of a legacy that stretched back through time itself. The legacy of the Timekeepers, a group of individuals who had dared to travel back to the age of the dinosaurs and had emerged with powers beyond imagining. The new generation of Timekeepers faced a world that was more connected and more dangerous than ever before. They knew that they could not operate in isolation, and so they worked to build alliances with other groups and organizations that shared their values. Together, they fought against threats both new and old, using their powers to protect the world from harm. But as the Timekeepers worked to secure the future, they also knew that they had to confront the past. They knew that the chronotech experiments had been unethical and dangerous, and they were determined to make sure that such a thing would never happen again. The Timekeepers used their influence to push for greater transparency and accountability in scientific research, and they worked to expose the wrongdoings of chronotech and other organizations like it. They knew that they could never fully make up for the harm that had been done, but they hoped that their efforts would prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future. As the years went on, the Timekeepers continued to evolve and adapt to the changing world. They worked to find new ways to use their powers for good, and they sought out new allies and partners to join them in the fight. And though they faced challenges and setbacks along the way, they never lost sight of the legacy that had been passed down to them. In the end, the Timekeepers knew that their true legacy would not be measured in the battles they had won or the enemies they had defeated. It would be measured in the lives they had saved and the world they had helped to build. And they knew that as long as there were threats to the safety and security of the world, there would always be a need for heroes like them. As the Timekeepers faced a new threat, one that was unlike anything they had ever encountered before, they knew that the fate of the world hung in the balance. They had fought against many enemies, but this one was different, more powerful, more cunning, and more determined than any they had faced before. The Timekeepers knew that they could not face this new enemy alone. They reached out to their allies and partners, calling upon all those who had ever stood with them in the fight for justice and freedom. Together, they formed a coalition, one that spanned the globe and included people from all walks of life. As the coalition prepared to face the enemy, the Timekeepers could feel the weight of history upon their shoulders. They knew that they were part of a legacy that stretched back through time, and they knew that the choices they made in the coming days would shape the future of the world. And so, with a mixture of hope and trepidation, the Timekeepers set out to confront their greatest challenge yet. They knew that the road ahead would be long and perilous, but they also knew that they had a duty to fight for the world they had sworn to protect. As the sun set on the eve of the battle, the Timekeepers looked out across the horizon, steeling themselves for what was to come. And as the first rays of dawn broke across the sky, they knew that their fate and the fate of the world rested in their hands. The end? Or is it just the beginning?